Funeral homes have a room with a name nobody says out loud. Industry training manuals call it the selection room. Families call it the place where they picked out a casket while still in shock. The layout isn't accidental. The most expensive caskets sit at eye level, under the best lighting, usually near the entrance. The cheaper models, the ones funeral homes are legally required to offer, sit low in a back corner, sometimes literally in a different room you have to ask to see. This is called the Goldilocks pricing structure, and it's taught in mortuary science programs as a legitimate merchandising technique. Show 3 tiers. Let the middle option look reasonable by comparison to the top one. Most families land in the middle, which is usually priced 2 to 3 times higher than the minimum the home is required to carry under federal law. Staff at larger funeral homes, particularly those owned by corporate chains, are frequently trained on a scripted sequence for the arrangement conference, the first sit-down meeting with a funeral director. The National Funeral Directors Association publishes training standards that inform what many corporate chains adopt at scale, and those standards treat the arrangement conference as a structured sales process, as much as a service interaction. Staff are instructed to ask about the deceased's hobbies and personality before discussing any pricing. Was he outdoorsy? Did she love gardening? The answers are used later, not to build connection for its own sake, but to justify upgrades. A casket, lined in a color that matches the deceased's favorite flower, a vault upgrade because he worked so hard to provide for his family, so shouldn't he have the best protection now? This is called value-based selling in retail contexts. In a funeral home, it has a different name in the training materials: dignity selling. Families report in surveys conducted by consumer protection groups that declining an upgrade during this conversation felt less like a financial decision and more like a judgment on how much they loved the person who died. The arrangement conference typically lasts between 1 and 2 hours. In that window, a family is asked to make dozens of purchasing decisions, most of them for the first time, under no sleep, with no price reference points, and with a body waiting in the next building. Funeral directors are trained to move through those decisions in a specific order, starting with the casket, which anchors the family's perception of what this whole thing should cost, before moving down to smaller line items. Once a family has agreed to a $6,000 casket and a $300 guest register book, a $200 memorial candle package can feel proportionally reasonable. They aren't, but proportion is doing all the work, not value. Funeral home staff frequently frame preparation as something that needs to begin immediately, and emotionally, that framing is accurate. Grief wants to move, to do something, to take care of the person who just died. The funeral rule actually requires homes to give price information over the phone to anyone who asks. Most families sitting in the arrangement conference don't know that because nobody in the arrangement conference mentions it, and the training doesn't include a section on when to slow down. None of this requires a dishonest employee. It requires an employee following a system that was designed, tested, and refined by people who don't work in the arrangement room at all. Corporate-owned funeral homes, according to industry compensation surveys, frequently pay funeral directors a base salary that sits below what independent homes pay, with the difference made up through commission or bonus structures tied to average revenue per contract. A director whose children needs braces isn't weighing a stranger's grief against nothing. They're weighing it against their own mortgage. The add-on layer is where a significant portion of that revenue gets built. Beyond the casket and vault, the arrangement conference moves through flowers, printed programs, obituary packages, death certificate copies, transportation fees, and memorial keepsakes. Cremation, now chosen by more than half of Americans, has its own markup ecosystem. Urns, cremation certificates, witness fees, and scattering services that follow the same pricing logic as a traditional burial. Each item is priced individually, and each is presented as a natural part of what families do. Some of these costs are genuinely necessary. Others are available cheaper through outside vendors, a fact funeral homes are legally required to disclose under the funeral rule, but rarely volunteer. A family that brings flowers from an outside florist or orders death certificate copies directly from the county recorder's office can save hundreds of dollars. Most families don't know to ask. The vault is a good example of how a legitimate product becomes leverage. Vaults aren't required by any state law in the country. Cemeteries require them not to preserve the body, but to prevent the ground above the grave from collapsing as the casket deteriorates over time. A basic concrete liner satisfies that requirement in nearly every cemetery. Sealed, reinforced, stainless steel vaults, sometimes priced above $3,000, are marketed with language about protecting the deceased from moisture and the elements. Materials engineers who've studied vault failure rates note that sealed vaults sometimes fail faster because trapped moisture and gases have nowhere to escape and can accelerate decomposition-related pressure inside the vault itself. The cemetery's actual written requirement could be met for a fraction of the price. The Federal Trade Commission's funeral rule, passed in 1984, gives families a right that most never learn they have until after the arrangement conference is already over. They're entitled to request the general price list before any conversation about specific merchandise begins. They can decline to hear about caskets they were never asked to see. They can request, in writing, the minimum vault that satisfies the cemetery's actual policy, rather than the one that was recommended first. Some families arrive at the arrangement conference with a casket already purchased from an outside retailer. This is fully legal. The funeral rule explicitly prohibits funeral homes from refusing to use a casket purchased elsewhere. What the rule doesn't prohibit, with enough clarity to stop it, is a casket handling fee, a charge, sometimes several $100s, applied specifically because the casket came from outside. The fee is framed as covering the labor of receiving and inspecting the casket. In practice, it functions as a penalty for comparison shopping, and it persists across the industry largely because the regulatory language around it is vague enough that legal challenges are rare and individual losses are too small to litigate. The consumer exercised their right and got charged for it anyway. But the rule doesn't regulate the order in which products are presented or the emotional tone in which they're described. A funeral director doesn't need to lie to make $5,000 look modest. They only need to show you an $8,000 casket first. The last 3 decades have seen an unusual pattern, as private equity firms and large public corporations have acquired a growing share of funeral homes, often keeping the original family name on the sign so consumers don't realize ownership has changed. The sophistication of these sales scripts has increased. 2 companies, Service Corporation International and Park Lawn Corporation, between them own or operate more than 2,000 funeral homes and cemeteries across North America. That's not a fringe slice of the market. At that scale, the arrangement conference stops being a conversation and starts being a process standardized across hundreds of locations, reviewed by a regional operations team, and measured in dollars per service call. What used to be one director's individual approach to a hard conversation has become, in many chains, a documented, tested, revised protocol, informed by the same behavioral research used in luxury retail and high-end auto sales. The director in the room didn't write the script. They just learned it. The system doesn't need anyone in it to be cruel. It only needs everyone in it to follow the training. And the training was built somewhere else by someone optimizing a number. The casket with the flower lining is beautiful, and grief does look for a place to put itself, and sometimes that place is an $8,000 box.